Hello, podheads, and welcome back to another episode of Over My Dead Pod. I'm your host today, Holly Lamoureux.
I love it when you say that. This is Kate Carter, and we are joined by Andy Carter.
She is Kylie today. Say hi, Kylie.
Hi.
This is Kylie's replacement. We expect a lot of things out of you, Andy.
Yeah, she'll do her
So
best.
far, she's got a pacifier in her mouth, so I'm
Yeah,
not seeing a lot of commentary on this episode.
it's not going well so far.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you got to redeem yourself.
She might even fall asleep.
Okay, guys, a little bit of a different opener today. I was sent a text recently about the Idaho 4. One of the family members was at CrimeCon. I think the Kaylee Goncalves parents were at CrimeCon.
Okay.
And they were sitting there, and I didn't watch the recording, which, by the way, we didn't get to go to CrimeCon this year. Very sad, sensitive subject. Yeah, next year. We'll be there next year. But anyways, they were talking about just like ethically podcasting, and we try to be as ethical as possible the way that we talk about stories. And I think that we do try our best to be like really respectful of victims. At CrimeCon, we noticed a lot of booths that family members had set up. And
Mm.
those family members pay thousands of dollars to come to CrimeCon to set up their booths and to advocate for their loved one's story, whether that be like a missing person or like a questionable death. And they try to get in front of podcasters to get their loved ones' names out there. So I think that podcasting for true crime can be done ethically or not ethically. Like we know it's people's stories are not entertainment, but at the same time, you can do it in such a way that you tell someone's story or advocate for a victim or maybe protect someone else down the line that hears a story and thinks, oh, I've been through abuse and maybe I'm gonna, leave my spouse before it gets bad. I don't know, blah, blah, blah. All of that to say, today's story is actually about a true crime case where a podcaster has been advocating for the story to be told. He gets involved in the story, people start catching on, and it eventually leads to the person being caught. So we love to see that. Love to see that in true crime. And we don't have, all the best equipment. We don't have all the best things. We're doing this for fun, for free. So that being said, if you like this story, we try to be as ethical as possible. Send it to your friends, send it to your loved one that likes true crime. We would love to do this podcasting ethically and right and blah, 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 blah. Okay, maybe we cut all of that. I don't even know, man. But, anyways, I'll just start my episode. Let's begin. For more than 2 decades, this case would go unanswered, even though the answers were right in front of the face of investigators. A 19-year-old college student who met the wrong man at a party, and then for years, her family searched for answers, chased leads, and rumors spread across the Central Coast. So let me tell you about Kristin Smart. In the mid 1990s, in California's San Quentin Valley, a teenage girl named Kristin Smart seemed to have her entire future ahead of her. Growing up in Stockton, about 250 miles from San Luis Obispo, California, hope I'm saying that right. If I didn't, sorry. Kristin came from a close, tight-knit family. Her parents, Stan and Denise Smart, were both educators who encouraged their children to pursue their interests and make the most of every opportunity. Kristin, her younger sister, Lindsay, and their brother Matt were raised in a home where academics, athletics, and adventure were all equally as important. And Kristin embraced all three. In high school, she earned mostly A's and B's and excelled as an athlete. She loved swimming and skiing, but according to her family, what she loved most was seeing the world. Even before college, Kristin had traveled more than most adults. She spent time in London, she participated in exchange programs in Venezuela, and worked one summer as both a lifeguard and a camp counselor in Hawaii. Friends and family described her as ambitious, outgoing, and always looking for the next adventure. Her younger sister, Lindsay, would say that Kristin had a habit of squeezing every experience she could out of life. She was constantly searching for new challenges, a new destination, or a new opportunity to push herself outside of her comfort zone. So, when it came to college, Kristin's first choice was not Cal Poly, which is a college her parents wanted her to go to. She desperately wanted to attend school in the Virgin Islands. To Kristen, it sounded exactly like the kind of adventure that she'd always dreamed about. But her parents weren't convinced. While they admired her independence, they worried about sending their daughter so far from home. Instead, they encouraged her to consider a school with a reputation for safety, somewhere close enough that they could reach her within a relatively short drive if they ever needed to. That school was California Polytechnic State University, better known as Cal Poly, in San Luis Obispo. The university was known for its low crime rate and strong academic programs. It wasn't the tropical adventure that Kristen had imagined for herself, but eventually she agreed. After all, this was the beginning of a brand new chapter. And in the fall of 1995, Kristen moved into the dorms at Cal Poly, ready to start her freshman year and whatever adventure came next. But once Kristen actually arrived at Cal Poly, the reality of college life wasn't quite what she had imagined. Like so many freshmen living away from home for the first time, she struggled with this transition. Kristen had gone from being a strong student in high school to suddenly finding herself overwhelmed by challenging college courses. She was enrolled as an architecture major, and the workload was much more demanding than she had expected. At the time, she was trying to find her place socially on campus, and it was full of strangers. College became the opportunity for Kristen to reinvent herself a little. So, when she wasn't studying, she experimented with different versions of who she wanted to be. She dyed her hair from blonde to brunette and even tried out new nicknames, including Roxy and Trixie. It was the kind of self discovery that so many young adults go through when they're away from home for the first time. But fitting in for Kristen wasn't easy. She stood out in a crowd. She is 6'1".
God dang.
Yeah,
She's
she's
a
a
tall girl.
she's a tall girl and noticeably taller than most of her classmates. And she's kind of working to navigate this social scene while she's kind of sticking out and trying to discover like who she is. So she's kind of feeling like very isolated and unsure of herself at college. So throughout her freshman year, she calls home pretty often. Some of those conversations were difficult. Kristen's parents said that she was struggling academically, she's falling behind in classes, something that was completely out of character for her. And she started to question whether Cal Poly was the right place for her. On her hardest days, the homesickness hit especially hard, and by the spring of 1996, Kristen was seriously considering dropping out altogether. She begged her parents to let her come home and start over somewhere new. But every time she called, Stan and Denise, her parents, encouraged her to keep going. Then, around April of 1996, Denise wrote her daughter a letter. In it, she reminded Kristen that summer break was right around the corner and that things would get better if she just stayed the course. She encouraged her, focus on your classes, learn from your mistakes, and don't lose sight of your future. One of the lines from the letter would become memorable. It said that she had a world of opportunities just waiting for her, and that she simply needed to push forward. And for a while, it seemed like Kristen was trying to do exactly that. She keeps pushing, and by Memorial Day of 1996, Kristen seemed to be doing a little bit better. School's kind of like starting to wind down, finals are approaching, and many students were leaving campus for this holiday weekend. But Kristen decided to stay behind, surprisingly. She planned to spend the extra time studying and catching up on her schoolwork. In fact, on Friday, May 24th, she called her mom around 5:30 that evening with some good news. She had been allowed to actually make up a biology test that she had missed earlier in the semester, and she's feeling optimistic about that. Fortunately, she wasn't one of the only students remaining on campus. Her friend and neighbor, Margarita Campos, had stayed for the holiday weekend. The two had become close despite having very different personalities. Margarita described herself as more reserved and introverted, while Kristen was constantly encouraging her to go out, meet people, and experience life, which is kind of surprising what I've learned about Kristen in researching this. She seems like she's not as extroverted, but I guess compared to this other girl, she is. So if there was an opportunity for adventure, Kristen wanted to take it. So when some girls invited them to a party that Friday night, Kristen immediately wanted to go. But Margarita, on the other hand, wasn't nearly as enthusiastic. Still, after some convincing, Margarita agrees, and the two headed to the party. And so they get to this party and they walk in and they discover to their disappointment that instead of like this lively college party that they had imagined, it's mostly just like a few people just like sitting around playing video games. So, not even a house party. It's just a kickback. They're like disappointed.
Hard pass.
Yeah,
Hard pass.
hard pass. Honestly, hard pass on the big college party too, honestly.
Hard pass on all of it.
So Kristin takes one look around and decided that there's got to be something more. There's got to be something more exciting going on than this. So the pair leave and they walked towards this like campus row fraternity houses to see if like there's anything going on. Kristin hoped that they might find a little party along the way. But Margarita was like having enough. She was ready to go home. She's like, "You got me out. There's nothing going on. I want to go home." When they reached the parking lot of an apartment complex, she told Kristin, "Look, I'm calling it a night. I'm going to head back to the dorms." Kristin's like very upset about this. She's not thrilled her friend's leaving her. She begs her friend to stay with her and keep looking. But Margarita had already made up her mind. There was just one problem. Kristin had left her purse behind. She didn't have her ID or any money or even her dorm keys. So even if Margarita went back without her, Kristin wouldn't be able to get into like their dorm hall later that night. Sounds like me, honestly. So they came up with a compromise. Margarita handed over her keys and told Kristin to return them when she got back. So then she heads towards the dorms while Kristin continues to search for something to do. Years later, Margarita would never forget the image of her friend standing there while she walked away. And we talk about a lot, like, don't leave your friends. Like, don't leave your friends out doing something. But, like, she just, like, actively doesn't want to be doing this stuff, you know? Like, she does not want to go. And she doesn't even know what she's getting into that night, you know? But this girl's, like, Kristin's pressuring her. She wants to do something. Marguerite doesn't want to do something. I'm not saying either one of them are in the wrong, like, for wanting to go out or for not wanting to go out. But I just feel like it's not like she's leaving her at this crazy party where she's drinking and she's drunk. She's, like, she's sober. She's trying to find something to do. I don't want to do anything, you know?
But the whole like no keys, no ID thing, and then
Yeah.
having to borrow the keys is just, I mean, obviously we're 30 years from now, but that's
Yeah.
no.
Yeah, and no money. Like if you wanted
I know
to,
mine.
get a cab, there's obviously not Ubers in 1996, but if you wanted to get a cab home or, not have a drink that someone else bought you,
Right.
then you would need that kind of stuff. So it does suck, but I'm not saying it's anyone's fault, but don't leave your friends. The time was approximately 10:30 p.m. According to Margarita, both of them were completely sober when they parted ways, and that would be the last time that she ever saw Kristin Smart. So, still wanting to make the most of the night, Kristin continued alone. Eventually, she found what she was looking for, a crowded off-campus keg party attended by dozens of Cal Poly students. What happened once she arrived, however, would become one of the most debated parts of the entire case. Witnesses later offered wildly different accounts of Kristin's behavior that night. Some students at the party claimed that they saw her flirting with several guys at the party, while others believed that she may have been talking closely with just one basketball player. There were even rumors that she disappeared into the bathroom with another student. But other witnesses remember something entirely different. Some say that Kristin was drinking heavily, taking shots of tequila, while others insisted that they never saw a drink in her hand at all. As investigators would eventually learn, and as we already know, eyewitness memories can be very unreliable. And nearly from the beginning, people couldn't seem to agree on exactly what happened during Kristin Smart's final night. The problem with eyewitness statements is that the more people you talk to, the more versions of the story you get. Students disagreed on how much she drank, they disagreed on who she spent time with, they even disagreed on some of the basic details of her behavior at the party. But there was one incident that several people consistently remembered. At some point during the night, partygoers heard a loud crash coming from a hallway inside of the house. And when people turned to see what had happened, they found Kristin Smart on the floor. And on top of her was a fellow Cal Poly student named Paul Flores. Paul wasn't exactly the life of this party. According to people that knew him, he tended to keep to himself usually. He wasn't particularly social and spent much of the evening playing pool or just standing off to the side rather than mingling with the other students. But despite just being a quiet person, Paul actually had a worse reputation on campus. He was a freshman, but several students described him as someone who made women very uncomfortable. Academically, Paul was struggling. Some students believed that he had been admitted to the school despite having grades and test scores, like he didn't have those. Otherwise, he wasn't like a competitive applicant to the school. They just think that he was from the area and like they offered people that lived in that area like a better success rate of getting into the school. Like it's almost like a thing. I don't know what to call it. I'm like lost for words right now, but you know what I mean. Like he maybe shouldn't have been there. But academics weren't what people remembered most about Paul. What stood out were the stories about him. Female students had reportedly complained about Paul's behavior long before Kristin disappeared. Rumors circulated about inappropriate comments, unwanted attention, and encounters that left women feeling uneasy. One incident that was frequently discussed involving Paul was that he allegedly climbed onto like a trellis of someone's balcony. He did that to reach a female student's second story while he was intoxicated. And when the girl like told him to leave, he refused until she called the police. So that's almost like breaking and entering
It is
almost.
great. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it 100% is.
Yeah. And it's like seems like it doesn't seem innocent, but it seems like, oh, he's just up there trying to talk to girls. It's like, no, he scaled someone's apartment or building townhouse, whatever it was, to get to her second story and then wouldn't leave until she called the police. Like that's fucking scary. And this wasn't an isolated incident. Many described Paul as someone who regularly showed up at parties, just like hovered around women and behaved in ways that people felt completely unsettling. I don't even know what that is, but I'm sure that it's unsettling. In fact, for many students, that was almost the entire impression of him. He wasn't known for athletics, academics, or having a large social circle. He was just known for being creepy. He even had nicknames like Scary Paul or Chester the Molester. Okay. So these labels just reflected how uncomfortable the many, many women felt around Paul. Still, despite his reputation, witnesses generally described Paul as being quiet during most of the party that night. As the night wore on and the party began winding down, students started heading home. It's around 2 a.m., and a senior named Tim Davis, who had helped organize the whole gathering, was making sure that everyone cleared out of the area. But that is when he notices Kristin. And also earlier in the party, she had been introducing herself to people at the party as Roxy, which like we know that that's like one of her nicknames that she's like she's reinventing herself, whatever. So they know her as Roxy at this party, which caused a little bit of confusion in the beginning. But anyways, he finds her lying unconscious on a neighboring lawn. And Tim immediately realizes that something wasn't right, obviously. Whether Kristin had been drinking heavily or not remains a point of debate among witnesses. So, was she drinking? Was she passed out because she was like heavily intoxicated, or was she drugged? Like, we don't know. Everybody's going back and forth saying, no, she wasn't drinking. Yes, she was drinking a ton. Like, we have no idea. But whatever the cause, Tim could tell that Kristin was in rough shape. When he woke her up, she appeared disoriented and struggled to function normally. He asked her where she lived, and Kristin told him that she lived in X dorms, whatever dorms. Since the walk back to campus was only about 10 minutes, Tim decided that he was going to help her get home safely. About the same time, another student named Cheryl was preparing to leave the party as well, and she was headed to a dorm building like close in the proximity of Kristin's. So she said she would walk with them. And the three started to make their way back towards campus together. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, another student approaches the group. Who is this student? It's Paul Flores, Chester the molester. And Paul told Tim, oh, he's headed in the same direction. And he like offers to help Kristin get back to the dorms. Tim, despite knowing that Paul was a little odd, apparently wasn't aware of the extent of his reputation on campus. Maybe he doesn't know Paul really. So he's like, okay, he agrees. And he returns back to clearing out the party. And so this leaves Cheryl, Kristin, and Paul walking back towards the dorm. As they continued, Cheryl began noticing just how impaired Kristin really was. Kristin repeatedly just like had to stop walking, like couldn't continue. And Paul was often like having to support her physically, like to keep her moving. And at several points during the walk, Paul encouraged Cheryl to just like go on ahead, I got her. Like you go, you walk ahead. He told her not to worry. He's going to get Kristin back the rest of the way himself. Eventually, Cheryl reaches her own residence hall. Before going inside, she looked back and saw that Kristin was only about probably like 40 yards of the entrance of her own dorm hall. So they're like splitting ways at this point. It was close enough that Cheryl felt relieved, like, okay, she's made it home. As she prepared to say goodnight, she asked Paul one final question. She said, "Will you please make sure that Kristin gets home safely to her room?" And Paul assures her that he would. Then, according to Cheryl, he makes one final awkward request. He asked if she would give him a kiss. Get the fuck out of here, Paul. And she says no, obviously. He asks for a hug. Like, can I get a hug? Disgusting. And again, she declines. After that, Cheryl watched as Paul returned to Kristin's side as he continued to lead her to the dorms. It would be the last confirmed sighting of Kristin Smart alive. The next morning, Saturday, May 25th, 1996, Kristin never came back. At first, nobody was really super panicked. Margarita Campos, the friend that she was with earlier in the night that ended up going home, she was kind of the first one to notice, and it was because she was annoyed her friend still hadn't brought her the keys that she loaned her. Remember, Kristin had borrowed Margarita's dorm keys that night because she didn't have hers, yada yada. So at some point in the morning, Margarita walked down to Kristin's room and knocked on her door, and she's expecting to see her kind of passed out, like she's been a long night kind of situation, but no one answers. Later, when Kristin's roommate returned, they discovered something unsettling. Kristin's side of the room looked exactly like it had when she had left. Her purse was still there, her identification, her keys, everything's still there. Nothing appeared to be disturbed. It looked like she had not come back to her dorm at all. Still, there were explanations that seemed reasonable at the time. After all, Kristin's 19 years old, it's Memorial Day, maybe she'd met someone at the party, maybe she was spending the weekend with some friends she met. Maybe she decided to leave campus and go back home for Memorial Day weekend. But as hours turned into days, those explanations became harder and harder to believe. And remember, this is 1996. We're not looking at Find My Friends. We're not texting each other, it's just much harder to get a hold of people. So there's that. I mean, still it's days without your friend, but back then it's a little bit easier to comprehend that would be a reality.
I don't know. I feel like maybe a phone call would still be
Yeah.
reasonable. Or you would have left some type of note or something.
96, what? I mean, home phones.
Right.
But as hours turned into days, those explanations became harder and harder to believe. By the time more than 48 hours had passed without anyone seeing or hearing from Kristin, her friends knew something was wrong. They then contacted Cal Poly campus police and expected an urgent response. Instead, according to Margarita, the reaction was surprisingly casual. The officers reportedly asked whether Kristin might have left town or simply gone off with friends for the weekend. To Margarita, that makes not much sense. Kristin would have had to leave without her purse, her money, any identification, or any of the basic things that she would need if she traveled anywhere. They thought that calling the police, they would know what to do. But the concern that their friend was missing didn't seem to be shared by investigators. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, Kristin's family had no idea that anything was wrong. Over Memorial Day weekend, Dennis Smart was attending a swim meet with her younger children, and Saturday was a day I guess they called each other, and the phone call never came. Then on Monday, May 27th, the Smarts received a call from Cal Poly campus police asking a simple question. Was Kristin home with them? And this question is obviously immediately raising alarm bells. While it wasn't completely unheard of for Kristin to go a few days without checking in, it wasn't super typical either. And if campus police were calling to ask where she was, that meant that they didn't know either. As soon as they got off the phone, Kristin's parents attempted to file a missing persons report with their local law enforcement agency. By then, their daughter had been missing for nearly 72 hours. But according to the family, they were told that it was too early to file a report and that the matter fell under Cal Poly's jurisdiction anyways. Of course, we know that that's not how missing persons cases work. There has never been a mandatory waiting period to report someone missing. Now, the jurisdictional thing, maybe that's valid because, she goes to school there, but the whole waiting thing is not a thing. So if anyone tells you that it is, it's not. By the way, this is just every parent's worst nightmare. Yet despite Kristin being gone for days, it wasn't until Tuesday, May 28th, 4 days after she was last seen, that Cal Poly authorities began treating her disappearance as a serious investigation. Part of the delay was attributed to the holiday weekend. Investigators reportedly believed that there was a good chance that Kristin had simply gone somewhere voluntarily and would return for school on Monday. But from the Smart family's perspective, every hour that passed was precious. 4 days is a long time when someone is missing. It's enough time for evidence to disappear, enough time for memories to fade, enough time for the trail to grow cold. And as frustration with the investigation grew, so did the family's concern over how Kristin was being portrayed. According to the initial campus police report, investigators noted that Kristin did not have many close friends at Cal Poly, that she had been reportedly drinking on the night she disappeared, and that she had been socializing with multiple male students at a party. And please listen to what the campus police wrote in their initial report about Kristin's disappearance. Quote, Smart does not have any close friends at Cal Poly. Smart appeared to be under the influence of alcohol on Friday night. Smart was talking with and socializing with different males at the party. Smart lives her life in her own way, not conforming to typical teenage behavior. Of course, they finish, these observations are in no way implying that her behavior caused her disappearance, but they provide a picture of the conduct on the night of her disappearance. What is that?
So they're calling her a hoe.
So they're calling her a hoe and being like, oh, not saying that this is contributing to her disappearance, but like, why put it in the police report then? What is that?
Also, none of that, like, we don't have a toxology report. We don't have videographs or photographs or surveillance cameras of her hanging out with dudes. So there's actually no proof of any of that.
Yeah, and it's not what you're saying, it's how you're saying it. It's
How are
like
you saying it?
you can say, we don't know. We think she might have been consuming alcohol. We think she had, interacted with a couple different males at this party. But there's no, you're saying she lives her life her own way by her own rules. She's out there. She's talked to multiple different men and she's
That's
under
crazy.
influence. It's like, okay, and
Hard pass.
bye.
Yeah. That's not professional whatsoever.
Strange. Actually, strange behavior. So, to the Smart family, it felt like the investigators were spending far too much time analyzing Kristin's choices rather than focusing on finding her, because they are. And with each passing day, the search for answers seemed to be moving slower instead of faster. The delay would become one of the most criticized aspects of the entire investigation. By the time authorities began treating Kristin's disappearance as a serious missing persons case, 4 days had already passed since she was seen. And in any investigation, 4 days is a long time. Witnesses leave town, memories fade, potential evidence is lost, destroyed, or overlooked. If a crime has occurred, it gives whoever is responsible a significant head start. To be fair, Cal Poly Police were primarily a campus law enforcement agency. Cases involving missing students who seemingly vanished without a trace were largely uncharted territory for them. But I'm sorry, I don't care. Do you have a protocol in place? If you don't have the resources to deal with something, like ask the city, ask the state to help you. Like, and you don't even call the family for 4 days?
That's nuts.
Yeah, no excuse for people not doing their job. Sorry. Years later, the Smarts would say they felt the investigators treated Kristin's disappearance with the same urgency that they might have given a stolen bicycle or a routine campus incident, rather than recognizing it as a potential life or death emergency. Unfortunately, by the time investigators began focusing on Paul Flores, valuable time had been lost. Even after multiple witnesses identified Paul as the last person to be seen with Kristin Smart, police did not interview him until 6 days after the disappearance. 6 days. You're not even bringing him in as, like, you're not arresting him. You don't
Right.
have evidence on this man to come ask him to come in and ask him questions. Why are you waiting 6 days?
That's just normal to ask questions, not to wait.
Right.
Because they're not doing their jobs.
You waited 4 days to even start the investigation. And then you wait 2 more days to interview the last person seen with her?
I keep saying hard pass. We need to take that out. But like, I don't know why that's in my vocabulary today.
Yeah, full stop.
Full stop.
By that point, investigators already knew that Kristin had attended the party. They had spoke with multiple students who consistently placed Paul with her during the final hours of the night. Multiple witnesses reported seeing her with Paul walking away from the party towards the dorms, yet nearly a week had passed before police formally sat down with him. And when they did, things only became more concerning. Investigators asked Paul to walk them through everything that he remembered about the night. Over the course of several interviews, one detail remained the same. Only one remained the same. Paul insisted that the last time he saw Kristin was when she supposedly walked away towards her dorm on her own after saying goodnight. But the problem was that many of the other details of his story kept changing. But even more alarming was Paul's appearance during this first interview. When investigators met with him, he reportedly had visible scratches covering his hands. He also has a black eye.
Okay.
Thank God they talked to him before his injuries had healed.
Right. And you can tell by someone's injuries when they were done.
Yeah.
Like your black eye isn't going to be black by that point.
Yeah.
So
Is it
you will
purple?
know.
Is it green? Like, is it starting
Right.
to heal? Your scratches, are they bruised? Are they like blah blah blah, you know? Naturally, police wanted an explanation. Paul's first answer was that he didn't really know how he got the injuries. According to investigators, he claimed that he had simply woken up that way.
That's not what happens.
That explanation raised an eyebrow or two, so when detectives interviewed him again the following day, they pressed him for more details. This time, Paul offered a different story. Now he claimed that the black eye was from playing basketball over the weekend. But that explanation wouldn't last either. During another interview, before investigators had searched anything, Paul changed his account again. According to police reports, he now said that the injury wasn't from basketball at all. Instead, he claimed that he hit his head while working on his truck. 3 interviews, 3 different explanations, and despite the inconsistencies, investigators still did not immediately search his room. Incredibly, police would wait another 10 days before conducting a search of Paul's dormitory. By then, nearly 2 weeks had passed since Kristin was last seen. For many observers, this would become one of the most frustrating aspects of the entire investigation. Looking back, it seemed investigators had a person of interest standing directly in front of them, a man who was reportedly last seen with Kristin, who had unexplained injuries, who we know to be odd, and whose story keeps changing. Yet critical investigative steps were delayed. Students came back for Memorial Day weekend, classes resumed as normal. And as the years went by, those delays would become impossible to ignore. And yes, years, sorry to hit you with that, years would go by. But backtracking, as investigators continued digging into Paul Flores, they learned another detail that immediately caught their attention. Police interviewed Paul's roommate, who described a conversation that he had shortly after Kristin's disappearance. According to the roommate, him and Paul had been joking about the fact that Paul was the last person to have seen Kristin alive. At one point, the roommate sarcastically asked, "What did you do with her?" Paul's response was strange. Instead of brushing it off or laughing, he said, "She's at home with my parents." The roommate later reported the comment to investigators because it struck him as like just an odd comment in general. But despite accumulating red flags, investigators were still slow to take certain investigative steps. 10 days after Paul's first interview, authorities finally brought search dogs into the dormitories at Cal Poly. So the dogs are searching through these residence halls, and they're not alarming, not raising any flags until they reach Paul's room. So according to they're not even like bringing these dogs in searching like just Paul's room. Like this is like they're bringing these dogs in to search for Kristin and search for her scent, and they go to Paul's room.
Yeah.
So, according to the report, the dog showed interest in Paul's dorm room and specifically alerted near his bed. By this point, investigators' suspicions were growing. Paul refused to take polygraph examinations, but he did agree to another lengthy interview with detectives. And according to those present, his behavior during that interview was unusual. Investigators described him curling into a tight ball in his chair, pulling his arms inside of his shirt, and appearing increasingly uncomfortable as questions continued. Then at one point, he reportedly looked directly at investigators and said something that stunned them. He said, "If you're so smart, you tell me where the body is."
The body.
The body. She's a missing person at this point.
Right.
No one's declared her as dead. They're searching for Kristin, not for her body. But he's talking about her body. So, despite the mounting suspicion, no arrest followed, which that's Understandable. You may not have enough for an arrest warrant at this point. But instead, Paul's parents hired an attorney and the investigation just continues. For the first month after Kristin's disappearance, Cal Poly police handled the case largely on their own. But eventually, the investigation was transferred to the county sheriff's department. When the sheriff's investigators reviewed the evidence, they quickly focused their attention on Paul Flores. One detail they found particularly troubling was the joke that Paul had made to his roommate about Kristin being at home with his parents. But even then, progress remained frustratingly slow. It took roughly 2 months before investigators searched the Flores family home, located about 17 miles from campus. And when they finally did search, critics would later argue that the search was far too limited. Investigators reportedly did not bring cadaver dogs, and they did not conduct a full forensic excavation. They also failed to thoroughly examine vehicles belonging to Paul or his father, Reuben. So, like, how would he get her to his parents' house if she was at his parents' house? Like, they didn't search the cars, they didn't search the vehicles. Seems strange. That decision would later draw intense scrutiny. Shortly after the search, one of the family members' trucks was reportedly traded in, while another was reported stolen. Convenient. Potentially eliminating evidence investigators never had the opportunity to examine. The search itself produced no major breakthroughs. Still, law enforcement remained convinced that they were looking in the right direction. By the fall of 1996, roughly 5 months after Kristin vanished, Paul Flores was called before a grand jury. Behind closed doors, prosecutors explored whether there was enough evidence to bring criminal charges, and ultimately the answer was no. No indictment was issued, no charges were filed. And despite believing that they had identified the primary suspect, investigators found themselves in a frustrating position. They had suspicions, inconsistencies, troubled statements, and circumstantial evidence, but they didn't have enough to prove what happened to Kristin Smart. So the investigation continued, month after month, as detectives re-interviewed witnesses and searched for pieces of evidence that could finally move the case forward. By the spring of '97, nearly a year had passed since Kristin Smart disappeared. Investigators had interviewed dozens of witnesses, leads had been chased down, rumors investigated, and despite all that work, the case was not moving forward. Then, in May 1997, the sheriff's office made a public statement that would later draw significant criticism. Speaking to the media, the sheriff's department explained that investigators had interviewed nearly 100 people and that the evidence continued to point in the same direction: Paul Flores. But then the sheriff's department added something that people felt was a major mistake. According to the sheriff, investigators essentially needed Paul to tell them what happened to Kristin. Without a confession or some significant piece of evidence, he suggested that the case could not be completed. In other words, the message that they're sending to the public was investigators believe Paul Flores was responsible, but they could not prove it. So like they're telling the public this. They're telling them, we think it is this person, and we cannot move forward because we don't have enough information. Many people felt that this statement was like just handing Paul a roadmap, like keep quiet, say nothing, and the case is going to remain unsolved, and you're going to be good. Just don't say anything because they don't have anything. And the case does, it remains unsolved. Not long afterwards, the Smart family filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Paul Flores. By this point, suspicions surrounding him were widespread, and the family hoped that the civil process might uncover information that the criminal investigation may be able to use. But Paul already seemed to understand this strategy. When he was deposed by attorneys representing the Smart family several months later, he repeatedly invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Over and over, question after question, he reportedly refused to answer 27 separate questions, and frustrating as that was, investigators would later discover another missed opportunity, one that may have been very significant. So to understand it, you have to understand Paul's family dynamic. At the time that Kristin disappeared, Paul's parents, Reuben and Susan, were separated. They're living apart. They don't live in the same house. Over the years, many people would come to believe that Paul did not act entirely alone when Kristin vanished. The theory was that if something happened to Kristin, Paul may have called his parents in for help, and they may have assisted in covering it up. It's a theory, it's alleged. I'm not saying that they did. Whether that remains true is a matter of debate, but the family's actions would continue drawing scrutiny for decades. A few months after Kristin disappeared, Ruben and Susan attempted to reconcile, and Susan moves out of her own home back in with Ruben temporarily. Before doing so, she's renting her house out to a young couple. And that's where this gets interesting. Stay with me. So the parents are separated. They're living in separate homes. The mother ends up reconciling with the father. She moves back into the father's home and rents the home that she was currently in while she was separated to a young couple. So one day while visiting the property that was being rented, the mother of one of the tenants was actually washing her car in the driveway, and she notices something laying on the ground. It was an earring. And at first glance, it might not have seemed important, but this wasn't like a plain like stud or like just, circle earring, little dangle. Like according to reports, it closely resembled an earring associated with Kristin Smart. That is because it matched the jewelry that she was wearing in photographs on the missing persons posters.
That'll do.
The woman immediately recognized this potential significance. She knew the connection between the house and the Flores family. The whole town knows it at this point, and she turned the earring over to law enforcement. And then, somehow, the lead seemingly disappeared. And I say somehow, but we know how this crazy discovery gets lost. According to later accounts, the earring was never properly logged into evidence. It was never cataloged, never fully investigated. Yeah. Many people assume the property where the earring was found had already been searched by investigators. It hadn't.
Nice.
The house belonged to Susan Flores. The property that law enforcement had searched belonged to Ruben Flores. Two different locations. Their parents are separated, living in separate places. Rocket science, I know. Which meant that investigators were focused on just one of the residents. Another property connected to Paul's family had apparently never been searched at all. And if the earring truly was connected to Kristin, it raised an unsettling possibility. For months, investigators may have been looking only in one of the places where evidence could have been hidden. The frustration surrounding the investigation only continued to grow. Eventually, investigators did search Susan's property. March 1997, roughly 10 months after Kristin disappeared. By then, nearly a year had passed. Investigators searched the property but reported finding nothing significant. Unsurprising. And then, years went by. 3 more years passed before authorities returned to the house again.
Years?
Mm-hmm. In the meantime, Susan and Ruben Flores ended their reconciliation, and Susan moved back into the same house where the earring had originally been discovered. And then on June 19th, 2000, investigators showed up once again. This time it wasn't local law enforcement knocking on the door, it was the FBI's evidence response team armed with a search warrant. The warrant reportedly authorized investigators to do more than simply search the house. They were even granted permission to excavate portions of the backyard if necessary. But for reasons that remain unclear, no excavation took place. The backyard was not dug up. Years later, in 2007, investigators returned again. This time, they brought ground-penetrating radar, hoping that advances in technology might reveal something previously missed. Again, nothing conclusive was found. For the Smart family, each search brought a mixture of hope and heartbreak. On one hand, investigators clearly hadn't forgotten about Kristin, and the county sheriff's department continued pursuing leads, conducting searches, and dedicating resources to the case more than a decade after her disappearance. But on the other hand, every unsuccessful search meant another year without answers, another year without knowing where Kristin was, another year watching the people that they suspected continue living their lives. Because while the investigation remained active, Paul Flores was a free man. After leaving Cal Poly, he eventually returned to Southern California, settling in Irvine. He found work, built a life, and for years remained a free man despite being the central figure in an investigation that many people believed pointed directly at him. And according to numerous reports, the behavior that earned him a troubling reputation at Cal Poly didn't just disappear. Former acquaintances and later allegations suggested that Paul continued making women uncomfortable, continued behaving inappropriately, and continued drawing concern from most people around him. Meanwhile, Kristin remains missing. Years turns into decades, and and the case seemed frozen. And then an unlikely person enters the story. Not a detective, not a prosecutor, not a member of Kristin's family, a journalist named Chris Lambert. Chris grew up in the same county, and he was only a child when Kristin disappeared, but he remembered something that stayed with him for years. And this was a billboard of Kristin's face. Day after day, he grew up in this town, he passed that billboard, and it became part of his landscape, part of his hometown. And one day, as an adult working in media, Chris found himself asking the question, whatever happened to that girl on the billboard? Why hadn't her case been solved? Why was the billboard still there? The more he thought about it, the more he wanted answers. So he starts digging. What began as curiosity soon turned into an obsession. Chris began interviewing people connected with the case, revisiting old leads, and asking questions that hadn't been asked in years. And before long, those conversations would help reignite interest in Kristin Smart's disappearance in a way that no one could have predicted. Chris Lambert goes on to launch a podcast called Your Own Backyard. Chris believed that if enough attention was brought back to the case, someone might finally come forward with information. What happened next exceeded almost everyone's expectations. As episodes of the podcast were released, listeners began reaching out. Some shared memories from 1996, others provided tips, and many of the people contacting Chris had one thing in common. They had their own stories about Paul Flores. Women began describing encounters that painted a troubling picture. There were reports of inappropriate behavior, unwanted advances, disturbing dates, allegations of drugging, and allegations of sexual assault. Some women came forward who had known Paul years earlier. Others had interacted with him long after Kristin disappeared. Chris passed the information he received along to investigators. He wasn't simply producing a podcast. His goal was to help uncover the truth about what happened to Kristin Smart. Then, in early 2020, a particularly significant tip arrived. A neighbor reported that shortly after one of the searches of Ruben Flores' property years later, something unusual had happened. According to witnesses, Ruben Flores, Susan Flores, and Susan's then partner had spent the night gathered beneath Ruben's deck after investigators had already left the property. So it's like they had searched police had searched this property that day. Everybody knew that this was going on. Like, people are talking. And then that same night after police leave, the whole family gathers outside under the porch deck of their home, and it's like people are like, okay, what's going on? Like, what are they conspiring? Like, they saw them, they thought it was weird. They're planning something, they're unraveling something, something's going on. The observation immediately caught attention. As the public interest in this podcast grew, law enforcement took notice. In April 2020, investigators ended up executing a search warrant at Paul's home in San Pedro, California. And what they discovered was deeply disturbing. According to court reports, investigators found videos and photographs showing Paul engaging in sexual activity with multiple women who appeared to be unconscious. The material would later play an important role in establishing a pattern of behavior, obviously, though investigators still needed evidence that Paul was tied to Kristin's disappearance. The following year, attention returned to Ruben Flores and his property. In March 2021, investigators conducted another search beneath the deck where this neighbor had reported seeing the family members gather years earlier. This time, they uncovered something significant. After excavating the area, investigators located a large anomaly beneath the deck. So they then went and collected soil samples of that anomaly that they saw, and laboratory analysis reported that there was detection of biological evidence and staining consistent with the possibility that a human body had once been present there. Investigators also discovered fibers and evidence suggesting that the area had been recently disturbed. What they didn't find, though, was Kristin's body. And by that point, even with the biological evidence that they did find, too much time had passed to conclusively identify if the biological material had belonged to Kristin Smart. But investigators believed they finally had enough evidence to move forward. In April 2021, 25 years after Kristin disappeared, law enforcement arrested Paul Flores. He was charged with Kristin's murder. Investigators also arrested Ruben Flores, the father, alleging that he had helped conceal Kristin's body after her death. I imagine this being like a Gabby Petito situation
Yeah, 100%.
where we're searching for this girl. We think it's him. We know it. We kind of know it to be this guy, that he's at least the main suspect, and the family members are like doing very sus things.
Right. And help almost it seems like they're helping out.
Allegedly,
Yeah,
yes.
allegedly.
hmm When the trial began in 2022, both Paul and Ruben pleaded not guilty. Separate juries were seated to hear the evidence against each defendant. Over the course of the proceedings, jurors heard testimony from investigators, former friends, and witnesses from 1996, and several women who described troubling encounters with Paul. But one witness in particular drew significant attention, and that was a woman named Jennifer Hudson. She testified during the summer of 1996, only weeks after Kristin vanished, that she was with Paul at a skate park when the news about Kristin's disappearance came over the radio. According to Jennifer, Paul told her that he had been at a party with Kristin the night that she disappeared. Jennifer then told jurors that Paul admitted responsibility for Kristin's death and claimed that he had hidden her beneath a skate ramp at his parents' property. For years, Jennifer said that she kept this information to herself because she was afraid. Eventually, after hearing about Chris Lambert's podcast and the renewed attention surrounding the case, she decided to come forward. Whether viewed alone or alongside the mountain of circumstantial evidence accumulated over decades, her testimony became one of the most significant moments of trial. After deliberations, the jury reached a verdict. On October 18, 2022, more than 26 years after Kristin Smart disappeared, Paul Flores was found guilty of first-degree murder. For Kristin's family, it was a moment that they had waited more than a quarter of a century to see. But even then, one heartbreaking reality remained unchanged. Her family still did not know where she was. In the end, two juries reached very different conclusions. The jury hearing the case against Paul Flores found him guilty of Kristin Smart's murder, but the jury hearing the case against his father, Ruben Flores, did not. Ruben was acquitted of the charges that he helped conceal Kristin's body after her death. Susan Flores and her longtime boyfriend were never criminally charged. So while prosecutors successfully convinced one jury that Paul was responsible for Kristin's murder, they were unable to convince another that the members of the Flores family had knowingly helped cover it up. Then, in March 2023, nearly 27 years after Kristin disappeared, Paul Flores was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. For the Smart family, it was a monumental victory. Not only had they spent decades fighting for these answers, they had done so in one of the most difficult types of homicide cases to prosecute, a no-body case. To this day, Kristin Smart has never been found. No remains, no gravesite, no final resting place for her family to visit. And despite being convicted of murder, Paul Flores has continued to maintain his innocence, and he has never publicly confessed. He has never explained what happened during those final moments after he was last seen walking Kristin towards her dorm. And perhaps most painfully for the Smart family, he has never told them where their daughter is. Because of that, some questions may never be answered. Was Kristin killed intentionally? Was there a struggle that night that explains the injuries that investigators found on Paul? What happened the night that he walked her home? And where is she now? So investigators, their theory is that her body was hidden beneath Ruben Flores's deck, and that's why they're finding this biological evidence, but they can't link it to Kristin because too much time has passed. But they believe that their theory is that she was buried there at some point, and she was obviously eventually moved before law enforcement could recover her. And where she is now, they don't know. The truth may still be known by only a handful of people. And what is harder to dispute is the role that renewed public attention played in finally moving the case forward. By the time Paul Flores was arrested, Kristin's disappearance had been unsolved for nearly a quarter of a century. The investigation had grown cold, leads had dried up, and many people believed that the case would never be solved. Then came in Chris Lambert and his podcast, Your Own Backyard, What started as one local journalist asking questions about a case from his hometown became one of the most influential true crime podcasts ever produced because listeners came forward, witnesses re examined old memories, new information reached investigators, and public pressure brought renewed focus to a case that had nearly faded into history. So, in fact, Chris himself became part of the story. During trial proceedings, defense attorneys repeatedly referenced the podcaster, whose work had reignited interest in the investigation. Testimony, witnesses, and evidence surfaced the years following the podcast release, and it became impossible to ignore. But perhaps the most remarkable part of the story isn't the podcast itself. It's what happened because of the people that listened. Former witnesses came forward, community members shared information. People who had crossed paths with Paul Flores years earlier finally decided to speak up. And together, those voices helped accomplish something that had seemed impossible for nearly 3 decades. They helped bring justice for Kristin Smart. Not complete closure, not every answer, but justice. And while Kristin's family still does not know exactly what happened, they do finally know some of the things that happened to their daughter who walked away from a party Memorial Day weekend in 1996 and never came home. For nearly 27 years, Kristin Smart's story remained unfinished. Today, because so many people refuse to let her be forgotten, it no longer is. And that is Kristin's story.
I always find no body cases super fascinating because the legal structure that has to go behind a trial when there's no like actual physical body evidence is crazy.
Yeah.
Like you have to be without, I mean, no matter what, you have to be without doubt for
Yeah.
you as a jury member to convict somebody, but to also do it with no body is crazy.
Yeah, honestly, it's crazy. Like, I do feel confident that justice was served in this case, that it is Paul Flores. But like at the same time, it's so like you said, it has to be so hard to convict someone without knowing the details of a case, especially when the person you're prosecuting won't admit to it or,
Right. Give
continues to plead
anything.
his innocence. You have
Right.
it's circumstantial, really. It is.
Yeah. Which is very tough. In this case, they had a lot pinned against him, but not a lot of physical evidence. It was more all, stuff that was verbatim and whatnot.
Yeah, and just him being like a general creep.
Chester the molester.
Yeah. Yeah. So I said all of that and fumbled around in the beginning to kind of tie this to the fact that, like, it was weird that I had a family member send me that story where it was like the family was saying, like, this isn't entertainment. This is our story. This is our life. And like, so true. It's so true. And I think that there's like ethical ways to run a true crime podcast, as there is in like any situation of like when you're dealing with people whose lives are at stake and whose lives are impacted by like whether that be like and whatever, like there's ethical ways to deal with stuff like that. And I hope that our podcast like continues to and we will, let me say that over again maybe, but like in our podcast we always want to be doing things the responsible and ethical way and advocating for the victims and their families and not exploiting stories because it's people's lives.
Right.
So,
And that's hard to
anyways,
do.
yeah, and it is hard to do because it is something that people find interesting. They do find things that they can't explain. Why would someone do this? Why would somebody, take someone else's life? It's found as like, it's interesting because we don't understand it. And
Right.
it is like entertainment in such a way, but you also have to remember that you're dealing with people's real lives.
Right. And like one of the most famous cases, you even touched on this before, but one of the most famous cases nowadays is Gabby Petito's case when it comes and involves this because like we don't talk about the Brian case. We talk about Gabby's case.
Exactly.
And she
Yeah.
was the victim. She was the one that got killed. She's the one that this
Mhm.
all happened to. But it's funny because we talk about a lot of killers on this show, serial killers, stuff like that. But it's
Mhm.
cool to see stories where you talk about the victim first. Your whole script could have been based off of him, not her.
Yeah, and I do try to ask myself that when I'm writing. I'm like, it's especially when you're dealing with like a serial killer case. It's like their name,
Yeah.
this serial killer. You don't really know the victims a lot of times unless you have like a personal like connection or something. But Yeah, I don't know. I think that there's like a responsible way to do it, and I know that we always try to do that. So if you, all the support we appreciate and the people that listen and continue to stick by that. So anyways, blah blah blah. Send this episode, sign up for notifications, do all the things. We're trying
We
to do this
prom
right.
we're
And
doing merch. We promise.
yes, we have a lot of exciting things in the pipeline. We want to do some merch. We want to change some things about the way that we do our podcast. And we appreciate and love all of you guys that support us. And we're excited to be here with you. Blah,
Yeah,
blah, blah.
we
Okay.
got exciting shit coming.
Exciting shit coming. Exciting shit. Okay. And with that, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Over My Dead Pod. We will see you next week with another thrilling case. Bye.
Bye.